In 1962, the United States Navy did something that should have been impossible. They took the most dangerous technology ever invented by human hands, and they buried it in the most pristine wilderness on the face of this earth. Not in a desert, not in a salt mine, not somewhere they could contain the damage when things went wrong. In Antarctica. And things went very wrong. The official story calls it a landmark achievement in clean energy, a bold experiment in scientific progress. The Navy brass stood tall at their podiums and told the American public that they had brought the future to the bottom of the world. What they actually brought was a radioactive time bomb. The men who lived and worked next to it, they had a different name for it, not the formal designation, not PM-3A, not the McMurdo Station nuclear power plant. They called it Nuki Poo. And if that name makes you smile for just a second, hold that thought, because before this story is over, that name is going to feel like a eulogy. Picture McMurdo Station in the early 1960s. You're at the edge of the world. The wind doesn't just blow there, it punishes you. It comes off the Ross ice shelf like a living thing, like it wants to strip the skin from your face and remind you that you were never supposed to be here. The temperature can drop to 60 below. The sun disappears for months at a time. Supply chains are fragile. Diesel fuel is expensive. Everything has to be shipped in from thousands of miles away. And someone in Washington, someone sitting behind a warm desk in a warm building, had what they thought was a brilliant idea. What if we powered McMurdo Station with a nuclear reactor? No more fuel shipments, no more diesel. Clean, cheap, limitless power right there at the bottom of the world. The Eisenhower administration called it the Atoms for Peace program. The Navy called it the future. The men who actually had to build it, they called it something they couldn't print in a newspaper. The PM-3A arrived in pieces in 1961. Crated, numbered, shipped across the Pacific, and offloaded onto ice that moved. Because here's what the planners back in Washington had either forgotten or chosen to ignore. Antarctica doesn't sit still. The ground beneath McMurdo isn't solid bedrock. It's volcanic. It shifts. It breathes. And the ice is alive in ways that no engineer drawing diagrams in a Virginia office could fully account for. The reactor was assembled on Observation Hill, workers in extreme cold weather gear piecing together components that had to fit perfectly, because in a nuclear system, perfectly is the only acceptable standard. Anything less than perfect. And you're not dealing with a power outage. You're dealing with something that poisons the ground for 10,000 years. They got it running. January 1962. And for a brief moment, the Navy had their triumph. McMurdo Station lit up. Hot water flowed. The base that had been shivering on diesel generators was now drawing power from the atom itself. The admirals sent their press releases. The newspapers ran their headlines. America was winning the Cold War. Even at the South Pole, but somewhere in the reactor room, in the constant low hum of that machine doing its work, the first cracks were already forming. Here's what they didn't put in the press releases. From virtually the first day, it went critical. The PM-3A was a nightmare. Coolant leaks, pressure fluctuations, mechanical failures that had the maintenance crews working in shifts that should have been illegal, in temperatures that froze the tools in their hands. The reactor required repairs at a pace that no one had anticipated and no manual had prepared them for. Between 1962 and 1972, the PM-3A experienced over 300 significant mechanical problems, depending on how you count them, and the Navy had very particular ways of counting them. The number climbs even higher. Radioactive steam, contaminated water seeping into the volcanic rock beneath the station, low-level radiation exposure for the men who worked there, day after day, week after week, with inadequate shielding and documentation practices that would make a modern nuclear safety inspector go pale. The sailors and civilian workers who rotated through McMurdo during those years, many of them weren't told the full truth about what they were being exposed to. They were given dosimeters, those little badges that measure radiation, but some men reported that the badges were checked infrequently, that records were incomplete, That when the numbers climbed, the response wasn't always to pull men from duty. Sometimes the response was to look the other way. If you spent time in the military during the Cold War, you already know exactly how these secrets get kept. It's not one dramatic decision, it's 100 small ones, a form that doesn't get filed, a measurement that doesn't get recorded, a briefing where the word radiation never gets spoken out loud. Subscribe if you're tired of the official narrative, because this story is far from over. But the radiation exposure wasn't the worst part. Wait until you hear what they decided to do when the whole thing finally fell apart. By 1972, the Navy had had enough. The PM-3A was shut down, decommissioned. The dream of nuclear power at the bottom of the world officially declared over. But now they had a problem, a massive problem. 10 years of leaks, 10 years of radioactive water seeping into the volcanic soil beneath Observation Hill. 10 years of contamination spreading in ways that the original builders had never planned for, because they had never planned for failure at all. The soil around the reactor wasn't just dirty, it was hot, contaminated with radioactive isotopes that don't care about international treaties or press releases. Isotopes with half-lives measured not in years, but in decades. And this contaminated Earth was sitting in Antarctica, one of the most protected and pristine environments on the planet, a place that belonged, in the deepest legal and moral sense, to all of humanity. So what did the United States Navy do? They dug it up. 11,000 tons of contaminated rock and soil, 11,000 tons of poisoned Antarctic earth, scooped up, bagged, containerized, and shipped across the Drake Passage, up through the Pacific, all the way to a disposal site in the United States. 11,000 tons. And even then, even after that staggering effort to erase the evidence, the cleanup was not complete, couldn't be complete, because you cannot unring that bell. You cannot scrape every molecule of contamination from volcanic rock that has been absorbing radioactive water for a decade. Some of it stayed, some of it is still there. Now here's where this story becomes something more than a Cold War footnote. The men who served at McMurdo during those 10 years, the Navy personnel, the civilian contractors, the scientists who worked in the shadow of Nuki Poo without fully understanding what shadow they were standing in. Many of them came home, and years later, some of them got sick. Thyroid cancer, leukemia, cancers of the blood, the bone, the organs that radiation damages in ways that don't always show up immediately. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes decades. The body keeps a ledger, and eventually it presents the bill. Veterans began comparing notes, writing letters, trying to reconstruct their exposure histories from records that were incomplete, missing, in some cases, gone. The VA was not always receptive. The burden of proof for radiation-related illness in veterans has historically been set at a level that makes it nearly impossible to connect a cancer diagnosis to a specific exposure event, especially one that took place at a classified location in a program that the government spent years minimizing. Some of these men fought for years just to have their service at McMurdo officially acknowledged, to have their medical conditions taken seriously, to be told by the country they served that yes, what happened to them was real. Some of them are still fighting. Some of them ran out of time. The Navy claims the cleanup was thorough, that McMurdo Station is safe, that the story of PM-3A is a chapter that has been properly closed. But here's what they can't explain away. The area where the reactor once stood is still designated as a contamination zone, restricted, off-limits to unsupervised access. Decades after decommissioning, after 11,000 tons of earth were removed, after every official statement declared the matter resolved, there is still a forbidden zone in the Antarctic ice. And the ice does not forget. Antarctica is not a static environment. The volcanic activity beneath McMurdo is ongoing. Water moves through rock, glaciers shift. The ecosystem down there, isolated for millions of years, has no evolutionary defense against radioactive contamination. The organisms in that soil, in those meltwater streams, they never encountered this before. We don't fully understand the long-term ecological consequences. The scientific literature is sparse, the monitoring is limited, and the political will to demand real transparency about what that reactor left behind has never quite materialized. The Navy claimed they cleaned it all up, but some say the ice remembers. Type truth in the comments if you believe there are still hotspots in Antarctica, because the people who've studied the site up close are not as confident as the official reports would have you believe. What happened at McMurdo Station is not an isolated story. It is a template, the same arrogance, the same closed-door decision-making. The same pattern of exposure, denial, incomplete records, and veterans left to fight bureaucracies that outlast their health. You saw it with the atomic veterans who watched above-ground nuclear tests in Nevada and the Pacific. You saw it with the sailors who cleaned up the Bikini Atoll test ships with mops and bare hands. You see it everywhere. The government decided that operational security outweighed the lives of the men doing the actual work. Nuki Poo was a nickname born from dark humor, the kind of humor that men develop when they are scared and powerless and trying to cope with something they don't fully understand. They laughed at it because laughing was the only thing left to do. The men who built it, ran it, repaired it with frozen hands in the Antarctic dark. They deserved the truth. They deserved protection. They deserved records that weren't lost, an oversight that wasn't optional, and a government that counted their exposure in facts rather than conveniences. Some of them got justice. Most of them got silence. And somewhere at the bottom of the world, beneath the ice and the volcanic rock, and the official reports that carefully choose which questions to answer, the PM-3A's legacy endures, not with a hum, but with a half-life.